Foreign Minister Kang Kyung Wha, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you for having me.
If you get through this, it's not the end of the episode, it's the beginning of a new way of living, almost.
Foreign Minister Kang Kyung Wha, she joins us via satellite from Seoul. Thank you very much.
We realize that we will never be able to go back to life pre-COVID-19. We have to live with this risk. Privacy is a very important human right, but it is not an absolute right. I think the ICCPR makes this very clear.
That's an acceptable practice?
It is not okay. It is not okay. I think discrimination, prejudice against people for whom...
South Korea has been hailed as a model country in bringing its coronavirus infection rate under control. But the methods have raised privacy and public shaming concerns, and now there are reports that the virus is back again. My guest this week is South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kyung Wha. Has her government made too many compromises on citizens' privacy in its efforts to contain the pandemic? And how could the public health crisis impact diplomacy in the region and beyond, especially with its nuclear neighbor to the north? Foreign Minister Kang Kyung Wha, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you for having me.
Your country has reported a flare-up in coronavirus cases this week around the capital at a number of nightclubs, which authorities are now temporarily closing. President Moon has warned a second wave is coming, whether now or in the future. This at a time when you were just starting to ease some pandemic restrictions. How concerned is your government over the threat of a second outbreak?
Very concerned, but we have been guarding against this possibility. This virus is very tricky. It spreads very fast, and it spreads silently. Asymptomatic people can be contagious. So we've been guarding against this possibility. It's very unfortunate that this has happened, but our system is now fully up and running to trace, to test, and of course to treat the confirmed patients. This is a population that we have been concerned about all along. Young people, nighttime clubs where lots of people gather, and evidently where the sanitary rules were not strictly abided by. They were instructed to keep a close list of all the visitors, to take all precautions, but it turns out that these measures weren't adhered to. And now we are dealing with a huge population that need to be traced and tested.
So given that, I mean, you initially managed to come to grips with the pandemic through without any extensive lockdowns, we have to see, which we saw elsewhere. You said in a recent interview that you didn't think the idea of a lockdown or a blockade would be acceptable to your public, that this idea of a mandatory blockade would really be contradictory to the principle of openness. Do you think that you might have to rethink that policy in the face of the second wave?
Well, I think the measures that we have taken in the immediate aftermath of this outbreak is closure of these entertainment facilities, and these are by city administrative decree here in Seoul and in other big cities as well. So it is a temporary shutdown of these entertainment establishments. It is not a wholesale lockdown of businesses, and I don't think we will ever get to that point. We are racing against time in tracking down all the close contacts of people who have been to these establishments during this particular period, which was a long holiday, just before we were hoping to go to an easier form of social distancing. And we have gone into that for the rest of society, that we call distancing in everyday life. And this means that we realize that we will never be able to go back to life pre-COVID-19. We have to live with this risk and be prepared when it raises its head again. Obviously, this time it has raised its head in big numbers, but I think we are prepared and we are doing our very best to contain this outbreak.
Let's talk a little bit more about some of the measures that your public is also living with. The recent flare-up in cases, it's further highlighted some glaring privacy issues with the track and trace methods that you're using to contain the pandemic. Enough details are being released to the public where people's whereabouts, their identities are being revealed. And I'd like to bring up this example because it's been reported that one of the recent coronavirus cases was a man who attended clubs in Seoul's gay district. Now, rights groups fear that, efforts are going to be made to forcibly out gay people who came in contact with him. Does it highlight a major failure in privacy protections?
I think the issue of privacy has been taken out of context. The issue of privacy is with certainly the patients, and I think we do this by law. Privacy is a very important human right, but it is not an absolute right. I think the ICCPR makes this very clear that it can be restricted, but it has to be restricted in accordance with the law. We have a very robust legal system in place where it's clearly identified as to where these rights might be restricted. And when you balance the privacy of the patients against the public's need to be protected from this risk, I think the answer is very clear. So the problem is,
so it's okay
you don't
for
do
you
this arbitrarily, you do it by law.
It's okay for you that some social media users, they've already posted video footage of some of the gay bars and clubs urging followers for donations to, quote, help put a stop to these disgusting going-ons. That's an acceptable practice?
It is not okay. It is not okay. I think discrimination, prejudice against people for who they are is unacceptable for a country that is committed on the fundamental values of human rights that undergirds our democracy. It is not acceptable. But I think this is what the government is guarding against, that, we don't have a consensus on the rights of the sexual minorities and people with various gender identities. We don't have a consensus. We acknowledge that. But the changes take time, and I think pushing for changes too prematurely can create a backlash that is even more harmful. But here we are faced with this challenge, and the government response is very careful about not aggravating those existing prejudices. And we're hoping that through this experience, we will dispel a lot of the prejudice and discrimination that the sexual minorities are faced with. Going to clubs is not just people with different sexual identities. It's everybody going to these clubs. So we're tracking down everybody that have been involved in the club activities during this holiday time.
But it's not just clubs. It's not just LGBT communities. I mean, I'd like to just ask you about the environment that this is creating in your society, because a recent study found that citizens are more afraid of being socially shamed, for example, for having or spreading the virus, than they are of the disease itself. So what does that say about the environment that these measures have created in society right now?
I think our measures have been open, more open than many of the measures that other societies have taken. Obviously, in this situation of crisis, people have stress issues to deal with. There is a psychological element that this crisis has created that all societies have to face. We are trying to face that with the best of our expertise in terms of the psychological counseling that we provide to our citizens and anybody who is in need. We have a system, obviously, that may not be enough, but I think we have a system and we are dealing with it. And I think this is a challenge not just for us, but for all countries. And I think the COVID-19 has also made clear that there are hidden spots, blind spots in society that are revealed when a crisis comes along like this. We have some of our dark spots as well. For example,
and you'll address
we have
those?
something like 400,000. Yes, we are. And this is not just government's efforts alone, because there's a limitation as to how far the government's efforts can reach. We enlist a great deal of support from our civil society groups who are helping, for example, undocumented workers, who are helping the sexual minority groups as well. We are enlisting their help so that people can come forward feeling safe to undergo testing and treatment.
Okay. We have economies under pressure right now amid this pandemic, citizens' health at stake. What do you think your part of the world will look like after this pandemic ends?
I think post-coronavirus, the world will certainly be different from pre-COVID-19. I think all economies have been severely hit by this. We are rolling out domestic economic stimulus packages for our strategic industries, for our small and medium businesses, for furloughed workers, for households. But that can only go to a certain extent. We are very dependent on our trade, our investment ties with overseas. So we very much hope that that also recovers. And we can't do that by ourselves. So I do hope that our partners will also see the self-interest in recovering the global value chains, the trade and investments, the business trips. And I think there's two trends. I think, yes, there are tendencies of countries to become insular and shutting of the doors and parochial. But I think there's also an understanding that, and the virus has made this so clear, that these challenges are cross-border. It doesn't stop at the border. You may close the border, but the virus still gets in. And so there's a increasing call for global coordination at various fora, at the UN, at the WHO, at the G20. And we do hope that beyond the talk, that there will be greater multilateral collaboration in overcoming not just the health crisis, but also the socioeconomic crisis as well.
South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kyung Wha, thank you for joining us on Conflict Zone.
Thank you. But our system is now fully up and running to trace, to test, and of course to treat the confirmed patients. This means that we realize that we will never be able to go back to life pre-COVID-19. Privacy is a very important human right, but it is not an absolute right. We have a very robust legal system in place where it's clearly identified as to where these rights might be restricted. We don't have a consensus on the rights of the sexual minorities and people with various gender identities, but the changes take time, and I think pushing for changes too prematurely can create a backlash that is even more harmful. There are hidden spots, blind spots in society that are revealed when a crisis comes along like this. It doesn't stop at the border, and you may close the border, but the virus still gets in. And we do hope that beyond the talk, that there will be greater multilateral collaboration in overcoming not just the health crisis, but also the socioeconomic crisis as well.